When you're structuring these teams, you start structuring them by like email versus SMS or some kind of function like creative or technical. An organization has kind of got a ton of like dotted line reporting starting to happen. You've got like your, head of marketing or CMO or VP of marketing, and you've got a bunch of dotted lines to different managers, different teams. You probably have multiple people in your content team, multiple people in your design team, managing these dependencies between these kind of like specialized sub teams that you're going to almost create.
To elaborate, like those specialized roles, that would essentially be things like a group of copywriters, you got a group of designers, you got a group of kind of developers. This is just kind of continuing that evolution of developing those more general roles that worked in the beginning into these more specialized positions. And this is kind of common in all types of businesses, right? That focus specifically on one type of thing within, maybe one channel, maybe just email, or if it's a good copywriter that can maybe do it for email and SMS and push type of a thing. With this, like you have to start thinking about how do you get these people on your team to continue to level up? How do you develop their skills? And how do you make sure that like they don't get bored and there's upward trajectory and room for growth? So making sure that these career progression opportunities happen, kind of the learning path, this is where your brain should be thinking.
Yo, Chase, what's good, dude?
Hey man, how are you?
Good, man. I'm excited about today's pod.
Yeah, me too. What are we talking about?
Dude. So inside the community, we've been seeing people, and this is kind of going to be a trend that you're going to hear from me is like what people keep asking about or reoccurring are things that I want to do. And one of the things people are asking about are like how to build their teams, both at an agency or brand side, like the roles, the tools, the workflow, all that stuff. So I thought it'd be cool if I could go congregate a bunch of information around what we should be thinking about from like, when you should be hiring him, to what teams, to who, and just a little bit of everything, including like the workflow, some of the high level on tools. We already did a pod about tools, but we're just going to high level talk about like the different things of tools you need in the stack. And you being in the agency space and me kind of being around at the brand side and of course on the SaaS side, I thought it'd be a good conversation to have. So you want to shoot this thing?
Yeah, dude, I've actually done some content like this in the past, but never this thorough. So I'm excited to,
Okay,
to dive
good.
deep.
Well, that's what we want to do. Everything we want to do is be super thorough and be highly informative. So in three, two, one.
From the open to the click, they're the masters of the flow. Just watch your list grow and your leads turn to go. Did we retain you so far, or do we have to extend it? If you want results, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it. Yeah, you gotta send it.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to Send It, where we discuss anything and everything retention marketing, specifically in email and SMS marketing and e-commerce. My name is Jimmy Kim, and I'm here with my co-host,
Chase Diamond.
Chase. As I said, episode 33, the title of today's pod is Scaling Your Email and SMS Team Roles, Tools, Workflows for Growth. So today, we're going to dive into something that a lot of our listeners have asked us and been asking about. And it's really about how to effectively scale your email and SMS marketing team. As your e-commerce or agency or whatever business you are is growing, your marketing needs get more and more complex. We both know that, right? We've seen the company struggle with that transition. I think the biggest transition we see is when they go from that one-person operation to a full-fledged team.
Yeah, dude. And we're actually at a really interesting time right now where it's gone from just hiring tons of people to it's actually not about that. Not about throwing more bodies at the problem. It's actually about just having the right rules, introducing kind of AI automations, kind of the right workflows, and essentially, kind of leveraging all of that and maximizing the tools that we're going to talk about to increase your ROI. And increase your ROI meaning for an agency, for your clients as a brand, or for brands themselves. So whether someone's doing this as a solo marketer, thinking like kind of their first hire, or if someone's even building out and kind of scaling a large team, this episode's really going to be for them.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to get through. So let's start off by mapping out how an email and SMS team typically evolves. So we'll start from that whole like early days, the solo founder, the solo person, and then go from there. So why don't you kick it off and we'll just kind of go back and forth and go through the timeline. So let's start at the solo person.
Yeah, dude, I think I'm on my fourth or fifth agency. So you're kind of taking me back to the early days where we
There
kind
you
of had
go.
that one person band moment, right? And I definitely remember it kind of pretty vividly. So typically, right, this is someone like myself or yourself, some kind of founder or early marketing hire who's doing literally A through Z. They're doing everything from strategy to deployment and execution, right? They're writing copy, they're hacking together design, or they're just doing plain text emails. They're setting up the flows, they're managing the segments and the lists, they're analyzing the results, or maybe they're not, right? They probably should be, but they're not, right? They're trying to do the entire package, the entire scope.
Yeah, and that all works until one point or another, and eventually you're going to hit a ceiling. And I found that most brands start feeling the strain when they hit a couple $1 million. Like, I think that's self-sustainable until then.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd say kind of generally speaking, and also for us, like our first hire, you typically want to hire someone that's specialized. So for me personally, the very first hire I had back in the day was a designer. I was really bad at design, and I was really good at a lot of the other things. So for most people, they're either kind of going to hire someone focused on content creation, aka the design, or potentially if you're a designer, maybe focusing on the copy, or maybe someone on the technical side, right? Maybe you want to write the copy and do the design. You want to find more of a quote unquote email marketer.
Yeah. Okay. So let's kick this thing off with the really basic level, and then we'll kind of go through the
Okay.
phases as you start expanding. So you start off as the solar marketer phase, and that could be the founder or a co-founder, or you may hire somebody, but really ultimately it's one person taking care of it. And some of the things that I think about are, number one, obviously the burnout risk when one person handles everything is really hard, because from vacation to any other day, they are the only one that can handle the strategy, the execution, and analysis, and that leads to like a limited bandwidth problem, right? Leading them to be reactive rather than proactive in marketing, which of course you and I both know, like, that's the worst place. You never want to be marketing with your back against the wall. And it often kind of creates difficulty staying with current platform updates, best practices. It kind of creates a lot of harm in the long run, but it's okay because that's what you have to do in the early days, which leads us to, well, the first specialized hire, right? Chase, you want to go jump into that?
Yeah, and kind of with that, right? There's kind of two ways to look at this. So you should probably hire a content specialist if your bottleneck is kind of creative. So if you're focused on more of the technical stuff, you should hire someone to complement you on the content side. Or on the flip side, if you're kind of more of a technical specialist, and your implementation is kind of like implementation and data management, like that's when you hire the technical person, right? You're a content person, you need the technical help, bring in someone to do that. Dude, it could be as simple as some kind of virtual assistant type thing. And then kind of with that, right? Like there's this generalist kind of specialist type mentality for your first hire. And you could argue either way. Do you have any thoughts on kind of the generalist specialist thing?
Yeah, I think I prefer in that early days, you do actually have to go generalist before you can go specialist. It's kind of one of those things, but that doesn't mean like, I don't mean like a generalist where they're super broad. They're generally like, I know how to do this much of it. And then some of these things I'm not as great at, but you don't have to be great at some of those things early on if you can kind of core hit those things. In fact, that jumps into kind of like that small team phase, right? It's like 2 to 4 people. There's optimal division of responsibilities between each team member. Like, everyone knows what they need to do. There's critical handoff points between each member, from like content to design to deployment. Like, it's a very simple workflow. And the documentation, it starts getting more important, but not super important, but more than what you would see from that one person, which leads us to kind of that second structure.
Yeah, and by the way, think about as everything we're talking about is like building blocks, right? So at this point now we've talked to kind of the small team, the 2 to 4 people. Now we're talking about the medium team structure, kind of 5 to 8 people type thing. Here we really want to focus on kind of the introduction of specialist roles and kind of middle management. As Jimmy kind of briefly mentioned, finding more of that kind of generalist to do things early. Now you kind of transition to you've got enough bodies, people should be focused on individual portions of the business. It's almost like an assembly line, right? That's how you should think about your email team. Just like cars are made, each person does a different part of the car. On the email side, one person should do account management, one person should do design, one person should do copy, implementation, et cetera, right? And with this, you kind of have to, balance specialization with kind of cross training for redundancy. In case someone gets sick, in case someone gets poached, in case something happens, other people should be able to pick up some of the slack. So that way there's not kind of a huge hole in the team, and, your own brand or a client's brand would be able to notice it. You want to be able to have kind of a fallback plan. And then with this, right, like along the way, and as you build to this point, you really should be building out your SOPs and really documenting kind of your processes, and you really should be formalizing it. That way you can start to build and scale from there, and make sure that things aren't going to be broken.
Yeah, I mean, that's super critical when it comes down to it. And that usually leads to that next formation when you get 8 or above in that team, which is kind of like your enterprise team, right? You've got to be doing, I would say, in this world, probably north of 50, 70, 80 million dollars, and you start getting into this like enterprise team organization. And we'll talk about the whole agency idea later on, but when you're structuring these teams, you start structuring them by like email versus SMS or some kind of function like creative or technical. An organization has kind of got a ton of like dotted line reporting starting to happen. You've got like your head of marketing or CMO or VP of marketing, and you've got a bunch of dotted lines to different managers, different teams. You probably have multiple people in your content team, multiple people in your design team, and so forth. And these managing these dependencies between these kind of like specialized sub teams that you're going to almost create.
Hey there, it's Chase. Just quick 15 seconds of your time because I have something really fun to share. Did you know that between myself and Jimmy, we have over 20 years of experience in email marketing specifically? And recently, we put our minds together and created a certification program that takes all of our knowledge to share it with you. It's called Ecom Email Certified. It's an end-to-end course and certification program that's designed to take anyone, regardless of whether you're a newbie or an experienced marketer, founder, executive, agency marketer, etc., and really teaches them everything we know about email and SMS marketing. And it really covers the full A through Z, everything from deliverability, AI, copywriting, design, strategy, you name it, we cover it. And it's loaded with over 175 modules. Yes, that's correct. We have 175 plus modules and counting. And it's 25 plus hours of education combined with quizzes and a community, all designed to educate, test, and certify you or your team members to be a full-fledged email marketer for e-commerce. And since you're listening to this pod, we really want to hook you up for your loyalty and hook you up with a $200 off coupon code of the certification. So jump over to ecomemailcertified.com. You'll find the code over there. And with that, we're now back to the pod. Yeah, and to elaborate, like those specialized roles that would essentially be things like you've got a group of copywriters, you've got a group of designers, you've got a group of kind of developers, folks that are maybe doing some of the strategy and kind of analysis, etc. So again, this is just kind of continuing that evolution of developing those more general roles that worked in the beginning into these more specialized positions. And this is kind of common in all types of businesses, right? The folks that kind of take you from 0 to 1 typically are more generalists. And then as you focus on going from 1 to 10, maybe those people can still be the same people. Maybe you bring in kind of some fresh new blood that focus specifically on one type of thing within, maybe one channel, maybe just email. Or if it's a good copywriter that can maybe do it for email and SMS and push type of a thing. And then like with this, like you have to start thinking about how do you get these people on your team to continue to level up? How do you develop their skills? And how do you make sure that like they don't get bored and there's upward trajectory and room for growth? So making sure that these career progression opportunities happen and kind of the learnings happen. Everything from like people on your team should be joining our community. They should be going through this certification program we have. We have virtual and in-person events, right? Like we have a lot of these resources and I wasn't planning on plugging it, but you should be doing these types of things. This is where your brain should be thinking.
Yeah, you got to keep training, you got to keep learning, getting the cutting edge stuff. And that's when like people start deciding, like, often we see with these larger teams, and I see it happen often with these larger ones, is they start realizing that like hiring in-house is great, but you also need to be thinking about agencies along the way. And I think it starts with core competency. Like most brands, right? They're really good at like their design and like their brand and storytelling, but the core competency sometimes is a struggle, right? Depending on what you're looking for. So you've got to think about what kind of functions you can work with external partners. It's always a great way to kind of like bridge that gap that may occur, because too often people are too heavy on trying to build their own in-house teams. And as much as I love or hate, or I guess I go both ways on this. Like agencies like can be helpful if you utilize them the right way. I want to be correct, create the right terminology here, because I don't want people to think that you only should rely on them. There's people who are great at managing their internal teams, but the reality is a good hybrid team is often kind of the best, because you can kind of leverage those internal and external resources and create those different kind of organizational charts almost.
Yeah, dude. Talking about kind of our own experience, there was a client that we had that I always wondered why he did this, and in hindsight, it makes sense. It was this guy named Danny Buck. He owns a couple different brands like Crafted and Circular, etc. He was super focused on building his internal team while also leveraging our agency to do consulting. So essentially, like what he was paying for is he was paying for us to teach and level up his team because they had like 2 or 3 brands within their portfolio, and we had access to 100 plus brands at any given point in time. So I think that is kind of a nice hybrid where if you do build the in-person team, kind of, I guess the internal team, I should say, for a brand, trying to bring out outside minds, whether it's consultants, agencies, freelancers, whatever you want to call it, to potentially audit your work, right, on an ongoing basis. I know people hit me and you up all the time for audits, and or B, paying for kind of consulting. That's super important. So anyways, with what you kind of mentioned, let's kind of talk about, we want to talk about kind of breaking down the team, and where do you want to start?
Yeah, let's get like what are some common specialized charts that you see ultimately? Like as you've worked in like the agency life and stuff like that and you've seen like these brands split off different things, like what do you see that works well?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple things. Like I'd say in terms of like the actual structure of the org chart, and then we can kind of talk more about like I guess specific roles would be I think a couple things. Number one would be, I think we talked about this briefly. I'm just going to kind of quickly raffle this off, and then let's talk about like actually starting
Yeah.
with maybe like a marketing manager role. So I think like cross channel kind of organization. So having different types of teams for email and SMS could potentially make sense. It depends on the size of the brand, right? And if it's a big brand, maybe you want to break it out. If it's a smaller brand, it might make sense to have one kind of hybrid email SMS marketing manager that tackles both, right? And with that too, right? I think we talked about this already, but like having function based organization, kind of based on creative, technical, kind of analytics teams, and then also too having different teams that tackle different parts of the customer journey, different parts of the funnel. So acquisition, retention, win back teams. So again, all dependent, as you mentioned, on the budget, the revenue, how much work there's going to be. If you're a small brand and you have all these different types of roles, you're going to be overpaying and people are going to be bored. They're like not going to have enough work. So should we start talking about what this looks like as actual like titles and jobs?
Yeah, let's break down those roles. I think a successful email and SMS marketing team has a lot of different key roles that comes in, and it usually starts with some kind of email or SMS marketing person that's are ultimately responsible for the channel's performance.
100% agree, dude. So, and with that, like when we think about this role, when you're hiring for it, right? A couple skills that they need to have. So, number one, would they need to be kind of a strategic thinker? They need to really understand what your business does. They need to have experience in the industry, and they need to understand your margins, kind of your costs, those types of things, and then also too, how retention and kind of lifestyle and kind of life cycle marketing fits into this. And that's number one. Number two is they also need to understand data. I feel like when I first started in email, probably when you first started, it was more just like, can you press send and can you do these things? Not like, can you
Yep.
actually analyze the data? The data now is king, and it has been for a while, but it's super important. And then lastly, right, like, can this person stay on task? Can they stay with the program at hand? They need to be really organized. They need to be process oriented. They need to be able to, as you mentioned before, be proactive, not reactive, because they're going to be focused on overall direction, KPIs, and ultimately the success of the retention channels.
No, that's exactly on point. So, as the team grows, we all know that things become less tactical and more strategic. So, let's go through a role one by one and break down what makes them successful. So, we've got a list here that I shared with you of different ones that come into play. So, I'll talk about each one of those. And then, from there, we can kind of go back and forth. And I'm sure there'll be thoughts around it. But the most important one you start out with is that whole email and SMS marketing manager or director. I always think about these, and we'll kind of break down some of the things, but their core responsibilities is they're the kind of the overall channel strategy and performance person, right? They have budget management, campaign calendar, team management. They report to leadership, and they have like that collaboration, cross functional collaboration that has. And when you're looking for this person, there's a couple essential skills that you should be thinking about. There's strategic thinkers, there's leadership, performance analysts, project management. They have good communication and they have experience with the platforms that you're using. These are essential, right? And really, the real big thing about this person is that they are essential connecting to other roles. They're the main point of contact to all those different people, right? And so that's really straightforward with who they are. Salary ranges, in the US at least, they rank somewhere between 85 to like $150,000 when it comes to like a manager position, and about 120 to $180,000 to a directors, depending on the size. And that's when it becomes really important because, to go in-house or outsource, outsource here, the moment you start bringing someone like this in is because you are starting an in-house team and there's a core leadership position. Until you start the in-house team, you don't need a person like this, because often if you're working outsourcing, they have a person in their team in there. And this person who you bring in, their career trajectory, to talk about when we talked about earlier, is that they go from that like specialist to manager to director to VP of CRM or VP of retention marketing. That's where the ultimate goal goes to. That's what you want them to be when there's a team to be a VP of.
Hey, it's Chase, and I hope you're enjoying the pod. But if I can just have a quick 60 seconds of your time, I really want to share a quick story with you. So I've been using Klaviyo since 2017. My email course and social posts starting in 2020 drove hundreds and hundreds of brands and agencies to start using Klaviyo. At one point, I think I was their largest referrer of brands and agencies out of anyone in the world. And then those brands and agencies had referred hundreds and hundreds more to Klaviyo. At one point, again, I was their largest networker, largest referral through all of this. And according to the Klaviyo rep, my agency also was the top agency on their platform for managed book of business. So really was a Klaviyo superstar, rock star. However, a couple of years ago, unfortunately, I noticed a major shift at Klaviyo, and I really wasn't a fan of it. So I started looking for other platforms to work with. I needed a new home. Clients needed new homes. Friends and other folks needed a new home. So I started really diving in deep into it. And with that, right, I went searching for an alternative. And I started finding platforms. I started connecting with the executives, started talking to customers. And one that really caught me by surprise was OmniSend. I met the co-founder and CEO, Rytis, back in 2021, and he was awesome. Really cool dude, really down to earth, really kind, and very, very helpful. Extremely helpful, actually. And because I was only kind of focused at Klaviyo at the time, I didn't end up kind of taking that relationship too much further. However, kind of more recently over the past year or two, it was obvious to me that OmniSend really was Klaviyo's biggest competition, the closest to them in every aspect possible. You think about all the core features, OmniSend really had that. I was really impressed and really surprised. And frankly, I wish I started taking them a little bit more serious sooner. I dig the team, I dig their platform, and their outlook for the coming months and years is incredible. And this success really speaks for itself. I know I'm vouching for it and speaking for it, but their success stands by itself. They have over 125,000 e-commerce brands using them, and they have a 4.5 star rating from over 6,000 companies on the Shopify store. They actually, at the last time I checked a couple of days ago, they have 2x number of ratings and reviews as Klaviyo, all while having a better rating overall. They're 4.8 out of 5 stars, right? It's incredible. And really with it, I use it for my own list. A lot of my friends and clients are using it. They make it super easy to engage your list, drive repeat sales, and create that seamless personalized experience that we're all aiming for. This is why I'm really excited to be all in on OmniSend. I have joined them as a customer, I've joined them as an advocate, and I've joined them as an influencer. I switched my own newsletter over there, and my clients are starting to switch too, and you need to be switching there as well. Yeah, for sure. And on that last note, right, like it's better to bring someone in as you're early, kind of as that specialist, and then kind of the manager role. And then as the kind of the role evolves and the team grows and everything happens, right, they'll get promoted. And with this, right, like in the early days, you got to find someone that really isn't afraid to get their hands dirty, right? These are the people that are going to be in the weeds doing the work. And then as things grow and as people grow, hopefully if you find the right person, they'll move to kind of more strategic work versus like being in the actual ESP, kind of doing all the bells and whistles.
No, you nailed it. In those early stages, they might be creating campaigns for themselves, getting on segmentation, doing all this stuff. But by the time they're at a couple team members, maybe like 3, 4, 5, they should be focused on strategy planning and team development. It's definitely a special person who can build and also lead. That is why it's an incredibly important hire when you're thinking about it. So that leads us to the next level, which is the specialist, right? Once you get that manager in, then you can bring a specialist. I think a lot of people try to bring a specialist before their manager, and I actually think that's a wrong kind of thought process. What do you think about this specialist role?
Yeah, essentially, right. Like as we talked about that manager or director, right? They're going from doing the work to managing the work and kind of setting the strategy. So essentially, they're kind of replacing themselves so that way they can free up and be kind of more focused on the overview versus the actual kind of weeds. And with this person, right? Like this person's coming in, they're going to focus on all the day-to-day kind of marketing strategy implementation type things outside of like the copy and the design, right? So they're going to be focused on kind of campaign execution, setting up the flows, optimizing the flows, maintaining the flows. They're going to be focused on, which segments are we sending to and why. They might be the ones actually scheduling the campaign and running the A/B test. They'll help kind of review and run some of the reporting, and they're really focused on kind of piggybacking and coordinating with the designers and copywriters to make sure that they have what they need. And with this, right, like the tools that they need to really understand and know is the ESP, so like Omnisend or Klaviyo, etc. Maybe they have like some kind of basic understanding of HTML. Some of the tools now are getting better, but they should understand how that works, right? They need to be kind of self-sufficient and understand time management, attention to detail, and they really need to think kind of analytically and critically, right? Because these people need to understand why they're doing what they're doing, not just do the thing that they need to do. In terms of the team, right? Like this person's going to work hand in hand with the creative team for content. They're going to work kind of with that manager or director to ensure that they're hitting kind of KPIs. And they're going to be able to review the data that someone else might be putting together. So that way they know how they're tracking. And because, again, you have that kind of overarching manager or director, these people aren't going to be super expensive, but they're also not going to be cheap. So they're somewhere, depending on where you're recruiting from and kind of what your budget is and their experience, somewhere in the ballpark of, let's call it like 55 to 85,000, give or take. And with this, right, like this makes sense when you are, as Jimmy mentioned, kind of building the in-house team. If you are going to use an agency, they have this role in the team already, so this isn't a need. You just kind of have duplicate people if you have an agency plus this person. And in terms of the career progression, right, they are going to have some kind of potential ceiling if the person above them sticks around and stays, although they probably should be able to move together. If this person comes in as an entry-level specialist and the person right above them is a manager, ideally the manager then goes to the director, and maybe this person then goes to potentially a manager, right? Maybe that's potentially a duplicate. At the very least, they should be getting paid more as they're doing more.
Yeah, I mean, specialized roles start becoming more and more key because now you've got a manager and then you've got a marketer, right? So I think the next progression comes in, and this is my favorite hire. I think this is important. Obviously, it depends. I think this one and the next one, they kind of can go flip and flop. But I picked number 3 as the copywriter or the content writer because I think writing an email and SMS copy is way more important than the design side of it, which is the other one, right? You'll talk about the designer in a second here, but to me, developing the content concepts, maintaining brand voice, doing testing and variations, collaborating on strategy, like that's so important. When you're looking for this person, I think this is really important too. When you're thinking about the essential skills, one, they've got to be a strong writer. Do not bring someone who's not a copywriter in to be a copywriter. I think this is a mistake that people make often because they think that someone can fall into, but you really got to love the right written word in order to be in this role. So you've got to understand direct response principles. That's an old adage that a lot of people do not understand. Like this is something you've got to be, and someone who's got to be learning that. If they don't say they like direct response principles, they're probably not a great copywriter, right? The ability to write in brand's voice, basic understanding of email design constraint, these are all super important. When you take this copywriter, they're going to work with your team where they're going to be working with designers, they're going to be working with your marketing specialists and different people in your product team even, because they're really trying to grasp and create the story and take that story and produce it onto written words so that they can go sell it through the written word of email and SMS. These people are not cheap, $60,000 to $100,000, depending on kind of experience and specialization. And this is definitely something that I think you can outsource often because a lot of people may not have the full-time need just quite yet. And there's a lot of freelance copywriters in this market. So I always tell people, don't go just rushing in to go get an in-house copywriter because you may find that they're boring or they're too early. And this isn't a place you want to cheap out. And too often people are like, oh, I'll just get this junior guy for $60K to handle all my copy. And the reality is that's incredibly hard. It's much easier to go get a contractor to work 15, 20 hours a week and effectively get way better work out of somebody and then get more work and better quality for less money. And that's all the need you really had. And last, when you think about that career progression side of things, you really think about it, right? There's a junior copywriter, senior copywriter, and then like a director of copy or a copy chief or whatever you want to call him. I've seen them all. And I think that there's definitely a difference between each one of them. And that's definitely something that comes into place. Hey, it's Jimmy, taking just 30 seconds of your time because I found something game changing for e commerce marketers and agencies. If you're drowning in retention marketing tasks, we have a solution for you. It's AI strategist, AI segmentation, AI email builder. It's called Raelion, and this platform is helping marketers create everything from emails, custom segmentation based on your data, and even helping you design your email marketing strategy. Imagine getting from audit to campaign to planning in just a handful of clicks in under 5 minutes. Their AI handles everything: segmentation, strategy, creating on brand copy that actually converts. Brands that are using Raelion are saving 50% of their retention marketing time and seeing an average 3-time ROI. That's why brands like Cost, Ginger Milk, and Life Pro trust them. Head over to Raelion.io for free 3 email AI segmentation playbooks in just 60 seconds. Yes, it's 100% free to try. They'll give you the best 5 minutes to spend today. Raelion.io, let them know that Chase and Jimmy sent you. Now back to the pod.
Yeah, I mean, dude, look, you know how much I love copywriters. Like, this is the heart and the soul of your brand. Like, how you communicate is how you're perceived. And obviously, design and visuals do play a part in that, but it's really the words in which you write that move people. And really, too, like when you think about when we're gonna talk about design stuff, all the design stuff starts with copy, right? It starts with giving direction to the designers on what you want to illustrate. So even having a copywriter that understands like how to translate the written word into something that's going to complement it visually is super important. So with that, that next role that kind of Jimmy was talking about is that designer slash potentially HTML developer as well. And kind of the core responsibility here is no surprise, but email template design, kind of campaign specific design, maintaining kind of a cohesive design system that really feels on brand and kind of is an extension of your other channels, right? It shouldn't feel and look so much different than your website or your social. There should be the ability for someone that comes in that sees a piece of your content on email, on SMS, et cetera, and connect them together. And really, right, they're helping code the emails, QA emails, testing across devices. Like these are the people that are going to bring kind of the written word and kind of some of the brand stuff to life, right? To the design. So that's super important. And again, the skills here, as mentioned, they need to understand email design. They need to have experience with email design. They need to have done it before. Make sure that when you are having designers interview, that you're looking at not only past stuff, but you're giving them design tests. So that way they aren't faking it. They can actually do designs for your company. You can kind of get a sense and feel of like, do they have it or do they not? And do they resonate with what we're trying to accomplish? And they also need to understand like email client limitations. Designing for emails is very different than designing a website and whatnot. And making sure that they're responsive, et cetera. All those types of things about making emails easy to engage with and basically on brand and kind of mobile friendly. It's all super important. And as we're kind of going, right, the team interactions, they're working with the copywriters as mentioned. They're working with kind of the designer, the marketing kind of specialist manager, and they're collaborating with developers on any kind of technical integrations. Salaries here, it really varies again, depending on where you're hiring from, the level of experience, et cetera. But anywhere from like about 60,000 to about $110,000 a year. Again, worth it though. Very worth it if you have the right size brand that's going to be churning out, a lot of emails. And then in terms of like the in-source, kind of an in-house outsource type thing, this is often outsourced, but typically in-house becomes valuable as you're sending a lot of volume. So if you're a daily sender and if you're doing other things as well, you do want someone ideally to be in-house for this, or making sure that the agency that you're going to work with has the ability and the capacity to send the volume that you're looking for. And that's something that you should have a conversation with upfront, because if the agency thinks they're only doing 1 or 2 a week and you're trying to do 5 a week, let's call it, there's going to be a mismatch in the output available. And then in terms of the career progression, right, they start typically as some kind of designer, then they can go to a senior, and then potentially kind of the design lead and or the kind of creative director is the next steps.
No, I like that. And, I think as you think about and you talk about designer, again, copywriter designer could almost be flip flop depending on what your need is. So if you've got great designers now, you should go get a copywriter. If a copywriting is a strong suit in your business already, then flip over to the designer. So that third role is kind of flip floppy. But, what it really comes into is now that you've got a manager, you've got someone who's doing the emails as the marketing manager, and then you've got a designer and a copywriter this time. This is when it starts talking about optimization. And this is where I go into to like a data analyst. And people don't think about this enough, but to me, a data analyst is someone who's taking campaign performance analysis, audience segmentation strategy. They're testing and doing analysis of campaigns. They're checking out revenue attribution, and ultimately they're predicting what may happen for the future on future campaigns. And they generally like Excel wizards. They are great at data and visualization. They're a little nerdy on a lot of the statistical knowledge and experience as a tool. And this person is here to support the manager right now, right? They support the manager reporting insights of and guides, and they give them specialists around like campaign targeting and segmentation. Like this is where a data analyst becomes really, really important, and it's not cheap at all. It's like a $70,000 to $120,000 role. It really just depends on their technical capabilities and how deep they're able to. They can go and like create a Looker and create these dashboards on either Google or Looker or any of these places. Like they're probably worth a lot more. And the reality is that a lot of times you can at least get the first like early part done on an outsource where you bring in a specialized contractor to come help you set up some of those data infrastructures. But eventually to have continuity and have a great analysis and ongoing, it becomes a in-house position. And these titles, I think that people will talk about is like marketing analyst, and then they'll eventually become a senior analyst, an analytical manager, and then a director of marketing analytics is what the titles may be called.
Yeah, dude, this analyst role, I feel like it's just becoming more and more important because, like, as these channels and as these programs get more sophisticated, like, you really need someone that understands, like, are we moving the needle? How are things progressing? How do we start focusing on kind of AI and automation and kind of predictive analysis? And really be able to model that out so you can understand the economics and the business more fundamentally.
Yeah, I mean, data driven decisions, right? That's the difference between good and great ultimately. A strong analyst can identify your opportunities and drive like millions of dollars additional revenue. At this stage, when you've got this many people, really you're doing millions of dollars through this channel, knowing that this channel can accumulate for 20, 30, 40, 50% of the revenue in a business. It's so much importance behind why you need good data driven decisions. You know, one area that I think you mentioned earlier around as you start thinking about channel and different diversification is that a lot of people don't have specialists in place, the right specialists in place. I think one that comes into place is like the automation specialist. And this is something I know you talk about, knowing how, you know, something we learned in OmniSense data recently, 1 in 3 people are making a purchase in automation. But again, most people aren't spending enough time there. I think it's a pretty hyper specialized role. Chase, you want to tell us about that one?
Yeah, dude, that was eye-opening, right? We knew how important it was, but just seeing like the low volume of sends on these automations and the high revenue percentage it contributed to was just wild. So in terms of automation specialists, right? This is really someone that understands and can build kind of these complex automation flows, right? Everything from the whole journey mapping to really understanding like the behavioral trigger implementation, the personalized logic, the A/B testing, et cetera, right? So this is essentially someone that is going to come in and build everything on the pre and post purchase side that relates to some kind of automation. So some kind of trigger is tipped off, and that's then going to trigger all of these emails. And you want to make sure that it is relevant, it's specific, it's hyper personalized to each subscriber. And everyone thinks they're doing that, but so few people actually are able to get that done, right? They're just sending everyone the same generic automated email for abandoned cards or welcome series or post purchase. Whereas if you do this, like you are going to be very differentiated from your competitors. I think it's going to get better over time, but right now, if you're early to this, I think there's going to be huge, huge potential. And with that, right, like people really need to know inside and out the ESP. They really need to know the Omnisends, the Klaviods of the world. That's number one. Number two, right, they probably need to understand some of the other platforms too, whether it be like a Zapier or like our sponsor, like Aurelion, right? They need to understand some of these other AI automation tools, passing data between different platforms, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel, being able to enrich the data. Like all these types of things are super important here, right? They need to be able to think logically. They need to understand the customer journey. Dude, they can understand psychology as well. That's fantastic. They need to work hand in hand with the data analytics and the developer, right? Understanding JavaScript, data structure, etc. And kind of as I mentioned, right? If they can work with the marketer on segmentation, the analyst on being able to understand like what LTV is, what repeat purchase rate is, all these types of metrics that are super critical here. That's important. They need to work with copywriters and designers on what content they actually need within all these automations. That's super important. And they're going to work and kind of report to this kind of marketing manager. This type of person, depending on kind of how technical their depth is, depending on, again, whether they're fully in house or they're kind of a contractor or potentially an agency. But for the in house kind of type stuff, about 70 to $110,000, give or take, is kind of that range. And then in terms of in-house versus outsourced, again, like if you could have someone that focuses on this in-house, and if you're an 8 or 9 figure plus brand, like you want this in-house, you want someone obsessed with this, they will more than pay for themselves, because it's going to be really complex. It's going to be timely, it's going to be specialized. Again, some agencies will provide this, other agencies won't. And in terms of the career progression, they'll go from some kind of like marketing specialist to maybe like an automation specialist to maybe like an ops manager to potentially like a director of technology type of a thing on the marketing side. Anyways, that was kind of that one. That was an interesting one. What other role do you kind of have in mind that's kind of more unique or specialized, Jimmy?
Yeah, when you mentioned the automation specialist, I think it's interesting because what I'm seeing in this market is, yeah, having like a really focused automation specialist, like a flow specialist, ultimately. I love that idea. I think that when you start growing up and you start using bigger and bigger platforms and you start getting more complex with integrations and a need for API, and you're using this third party, you want to do custom, blah, 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 you ultimately need a CRM developer, like a technical specialist in the business, right? Like a developer ultimately. They're doing complex integrations, API implementations, data synchronizations. They're doing these advanced like personalization things that are way over you and I head. We have people in our team that we rely on that once we start getting super technical about stuff. And between you and I'm very much a technical, but I'm a noob compared to someone who really is focused on that development stuff, right? This person is someone who's programming centric. They've got API experience, so they can integrate any platform that you want to integrate into your platform and pass that data back and forth. And they really are data centric. These people often are working with your IT or engineering. That might be what you might consider this person, and support that automation specialist, the manager. They're basically solving technical problems, because once your brand is this big and you're starting to hire people like a CRM developer, you're probably a unique butterfly. No solution in the market, I don't care what you buy, is going to work the way you need to do. And that requires a person like a CRM developer who's going to be expensive, 80, 120, 130 grand, 150 grand, even depends on their expertise, especially in this market. And a lot of times you can go and outsource this by project to project, but eventually you get to a stage where you need someone in-house, kind of like an IT manager ultimately in your kind of company. And so when you look at terms for this career, I think you think about people like a technical specialist, a senior technical specialist, a marketing technical manager, or even like a marketing technical director or CTO in an e-commerce business, really fills into this void and takes care of a lot of this stuff. What else do you think about when you start thinking hyper specialized? Like, I'm a team of 7, 8 people now at this point, Chase. What else can you think about hyper specialization? I can think of one or two, I think, but I'll kind of jump to you.
Yeah, I think depending on the list size, right? Again, like I think for the larger list, the larger brands that are doing 8, 9 plus figures a year, I think right at that size, you probably have mid to high six figures, likely even seven-figure lists. You're probably sending, I would imagine, multiple campaigns a day potentially, right? Especially if you're dealing with different countries. Maybe you have people in the US and Canada and Asia and Europe and Africa, right? Like depending on where you sell, I would bring in potentially like a list management specialist, someone that is just solely focused on, I guess, kind of a list management, kind of segmentation person, and also someone, right, without going too much into the deliverability side, someone that understands deliverability. Maybe that's a separate role in and of itself. It probably is. But in terms of the list management side, right, like a couple of things they should focus on is list hygiene, really cleaning, pruning the list, making sure that they're suppressing folks that aren't supposed to be there, people that are cleaning the list, people that are running re-engagement campaigns, people that focus on understanding and monitoring deliverability, someone even that's focused on like understanding if you're a subscription company, like the source tracking, someone that's focused on the compliance in different states, in different countries, in different regions, that type of thing. And with this type of person, right, clearly they're going to be very detail oriented. They're going to need some kind of understanding and ideally a decent understanding, at the very least, of deliverability principles. They need to understand compliance, data management, right, all those types of best practices. And this person, right, is going to come in and they're going to support the entire team by making sure that the data is really clean. They're going to work with a compliance specialist and a marketing manager, and they're just going to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward. Your engagement's going to be sky high. Your subs are not going to be missing emails. I mean, dude, there's so many segments of your list that like you think you're getting emails that might not be getting emails. They're going to make sure that you kind of fill those gaps. They're going to make sure that right any kind of VIP type folks get what they need, etc. And this type of salary could have in the ballpark about 50 to 80K. Again, depending on how skilled they are or aren't. Ideally, you're getting someone really good, so ideally they're very skilled. And with this, right, like this can be kind of combined with other roles in small teams. So if you have this in house, it's fantastic. Or if you do work with an agency, really making sure that the agency has someone that is an expert at this. This should be in their pitch decks. This should be something that they focus on is really diving into the list management side of the business. And in terms of the career progression, right? This person kind of start more maybe as like a coordinator, and they could potentially evolve into being like a deliverability specialist and or kind of some ops person. And again, like this isn't for everyone. This is more of a specialized role. So if you need to add bodies to do stuff like this, I would look here. Jimmy, you got any others?
Yeah, before we move on to the other ones, I think what's interesting as I kind of listen to your like list management specialist role, I think it is something that becomes important when the team gets big enough. But yeah, I don't see this being for most brands. They'll probably never get to a position like this. It's just as much as someone like the one that I can think of next, which is like a customer journey strategist. One of the things that people come to me, and they don't come to me, I get the biggest brands in the world that are showing up to my door that ask me about this, but they want to map out their customer lifestyle and identify key touch points and develop cross channel journey strategies and personalization frameworks. Like this stuff gets so big, right? Because you're working on big masses in the world, right? And these people are strategic and they're not going to be hands on often. They're going to be very much strategic thinkers. They're thinking about psychology. They're thinking about multiple marketing channels, omni channel ultimately. And these people are the ones that are going to be working on the strategy, the overall implementation of that whole thing we call journey, which is the entire customer life cycle. And they're
Yep.
not cheap. They're very expensive usually. They're thinking about 75, I would say more than 75, probably about 100 to $150,000. They're very expensive because these people are your future VPs of customer experience or your people who are retention managers ultimately, because they are thinking bigger. They have a layer behind retention and business that they're kind of overlapping when you're thinking about these people. And they're best for, this whole cross-functional thing. But really, I like this as a consultation product. Like you don't need people to come in and constantly work on your customer journey. They may come in, review it, give you ideas, and then kind of map it out for you, and then give it to your marketing specialist or someone to kind of come and take this framework to move on. Chase, one more that I thought about as you were talking, as you were going through, you started mentioning compliance and deliverability, and it kind of slipped my mind. And I don't know very many brands that have this, but it may be a topic, right? What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think gone are the days of like A, not focus on deliverability, and B, oftentimes like the email marketer themselves, they probably know like the basics and kind of some of the foundational fundamentals, but they often aren't like experts in deliverability or compliance. So I think potentially having this type of role is super important, especially if you're an agency. I think this is a role that's a no-brainer to have someone that can kind of float across your clients and it really ensure that this is dialed in. But here, right, like essentially the core responsibilities would be a understanding privacy, so things like GDPR, CCPA, can spam,
Mm.
etc. Understanding deliverability optimization, understanding sender reputation management, documentation of consent, policy development, etc. Right, especially like on SMS when there's like fines that are very hefty, someone that understands like all of the legal side. So I feel like this person should a understand marketing, B should understand kind of like the ISP and ESPs in terms of like the, for lack of a better word, almost like the algorithms, kind of the underlying technology and the way in which the primary folder works, kind of the promotions, the spam, etc. And then also too, someone that understands some of the law side. They don't necessarily need to be a lawyer, but they should spend time researching and understanding what laws are currently in place. What are some of the lawsuits that are happening, and how can you prevent those? What are some of the upcoming kind of legislations happening, right? Like what are kind of some of the bills that are going to be happening for states, countries, nations, continents, etc. That's super important. And then potentially someone too that even has contacts and connections at ESPs and ISPs, kind of at Blacklist, someone that understands that world and knows the right people. God forbid something were to happen, right? Someone that spends a lot of time within Google Postmaster, Yahoo Sender Hub, right? Those types of things. And in terms of this, like I'd say that the way in which they work would be kind of a advisory to the entire team, really making sure that like when the designer is designing that they're not doing a single image email. And when the copywriter is writing copy, that they're not writing content that is going to flag kind of the deliverability or kind of the compliance teams, right? They're not going to have lawyers after you, or they're not going to say too many words that will be flagged as spam. So I think that's super important. And then working with developers, make sure that emails are engaging and emails are kind of able to be consumed by all types of audiences, mobile, those with disabilities, those without disabilities, just the entire population, right? And these people are going to come with a 70 to about 120K price tag, depending again on their kind of legal, technical knowledge. Have they done this before? And then also too, like in terms of the in-house outsource thing, I mentioned this before. I think agencies need to hire for this role ASAP. Some people have parts of it, most people don't have all of it, and very seldomly do brands have this. So I think this is a huge growing opportunity for the right brands. And I think someone like this can really evolve into some kind of privacy officer or branch into some kind of marketing ops.
No, I like that. That's a really interesting one. And again, this probably doesn't start really become relevant till you're probably doing like $500 million or more. Like you can rely on contractors pretty often or consultants with this only when you need to. And I think most people listening to this pod may or may not have these problems. But the one thing, Chase, that I've noticed as we've gone through this, the smaller the team, the more multiple hats you're wearing. For example, a marketing specialist, which we talked about early on, might also handle your copywriting and your list management.
Dude, yeah, 100%. That's a great point. So I'd say like in my experience, right, like as you scale from like these kind of one person team or this kind of this team of one to let's call it somewhere like 3 to 5 people, you typically kind of want to group these roles into a few categories. I'd say kind of three primarily. One would be kind of more like, I guess, like strategic and kind of analytical. The next would be kind of more creative, and the last one would be kind of technical. And again, there are maybe a few kind of crossovers there, but the more distinct they are and kind of the more that they can stand alone, the better. And then as you obviously grow beyond that, you want to see more and more specialization because you can afford it. And hence it's kind of like a differentiator from other brands, internal teams, and other agencies even.
Exactly. And that's the decision of which specialized roles to prioritize, right? Just like I talked about the copywriter versus designer, it all depends on your business model and your challenges. A brand right now with a complex product might prioritize copywriting, while a high volume email sender, like you mentioned, might even bring in a deliverability specialist because they are sending so many emails.
Yeah, dude. I'm totally with you on that. And I'd say like you and I are seeing a lot of things. A lot of people ask us for feedback on the agency side, on the brand side, and we're seeing a lot of these kind of newer hybrid roles emerge too, like growth engineers, right? For example, who do marketing and kind of dev. And I think it's going to only keep evolving because technology is getting easier and better. People are hopefully getting smarter, or at least can, do a better job asking ChatGPT for help or something instead of just Googling now. You get all this extra help from AI. So I think it's only going to accelerate.
All right. So let's flip gears here. We've been going on about the roles, but let's talk about technology that powers an effective email and SMS team. Obviously, an ESP or SMS platform is the foundation, but there's so much more to consider, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those are now just kind of the foundational pieces, right? Like those are non-negotiables. You have to have them. And as your team scales, like you do need more sophisticated tech to kind of use and integrate and layer on top of the ESPs. And obviously the ESPs are great and they're getting even better. But we actually did a whole pod on this, I don't know, a couple pods ago, give or take, that talked about ESP options out there, right? Like OmniSend, et cetera. However, I think we should probably really, really quickly kind of touch upon like a high level stack and kind of some of the tools. So that way you don't have to jump over there just yet.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff in the stack that we made a list of, but let's just touch on it really fast because we're pretty far in. I think we're like 40 something minutes, 50 minutes in now. So I want to make sure that we're not crushing your mind right now. But email and SMS platform, we talked about it already. Omnisend, Klaviyo, whatever tool that you prefer. Platform selection is really important for your scale, right? That makes it important. Migration gets bigger and bigger and tougher, or harder as it gets longer and longer and later on in the stage. And cost structure of how they charge between list size or send volume is really expensive. And the one thing you don't want to get trapped into is enterprise features worth either nice to have versus worth paying for. Those are important. What's next, Chase?
Yeah, on the design side, I know a lot of people are using things like Figma or Canva or like a Photoshop or like an Illustrator type thing. And then there's also now like a new breed, a new wave of like specialized email builders that have AI, etc. So with this, right, like you want to audit and understand like what kind of basic functionality they have. They all should have basics, and then which ones have kind of more advanced design tools and how those fit into your workflow. If you're a team of one or if you're a team of multiple people, what ESPs and the integrations you need, etc. And really building out, like, regardless of the tool you use, some kind of templated system that allows you to scale as you grow and as you take on more clients or as your internal team needs to send more campaigns per week, per month. Really understanding like how you store and manage these assets. Like, dude, we worked with Air recently. I didn't even know like about that until recently, and like now I see why you would need like a platform to actually just house all of this stuff. Like, it's crazy, especially for larger teams. And then, right, taking into consideration like email specific design tools versus general design software and kind of what the current team, what their expertise looks like. And then also thinking about the future team, what that looks like.
Yeah, and then you start thinking about copywriting and AI that you're using in your tools. That's a good one you mentioned. AI tools to enhance, not replace your copywriters. I think this is really important for everybody. Content management teams for like Air, for example, you mentioned. Collaboration tools for review, performance tracking for copy. I think all things copy is not just written word. There's also things you need to do to track it. And in fact, when you track things, you'll get analytical. That's the next one, I think, right?
Yeah, 100%. So in terms of like analytics and reporting, again, most ESPs have basic, decent kind of reporting in house, but moving beyond just that and trying to understand a bit more is important. Attribution, obviously, right? That's a tough one, but really understanding that you have a right attribution solution in place for kind of these complex multi-touch customer journeys. I really do believe that you should be building out kind of custom dashboards for different stakeholders that want to understand different KPIs. And if you can automate this reporting, I highly recommend it because it's just going to take a lot of manual grunt work and effort, and you're going to need a lot of bodies for that. And the goal is to do more with less. So if you can automate this, it's super important.
Yeah, and then that starts leading you into more specialized tools like segmentation and personalization tools. You've got tools like Nacelle or Rayleon out there in the market, both doing very different things. Nacelle doing personalization, Rayleon doing AI-driven segmentation. But that starts becoming more and more of a need when you're thinking about behavioral targeting. Customer data platforms become more important if you're looking for that whole unified omni-channel experience view. Personalization engines are important, and of course, as I mentioned, you can wrap these things up with AI.
Yeah, and then on the workflow and project management tools, right? Like as an agency, we use everything from like Notion to ClickUp. So understanding that, really making sure that you build out sections for campaigns, for automations, etc. And breaking it down by email, SMS, push. Having a really good, clean system that allows clients or kind of the internal team to sign off or give feedback or approve things, and then really understanding how you allocate resources. So understanding in a given week or month who is kind of bogged down and who has bandwidth. And if someone is bogged down, how do you get them support? And that helps you with hiring. And then kind of understanding the calendar and how things evolve. And if you sell to different places and countries and regions, the nuances between those places and how things happen.
Oh, I like that one. That's a really good one. I haven't thought about that one. And that reminds me, one of the places that I think that would be really interesting is kind of like QA testing tools too. I think these are
Yep.
really important things where you can like render your email format. You can do spam testing and deliverability stuff and monitoring and A/B testing and DKIM stuff and compliance tools. All this stuff I think are kind of bucketed together when you're thinking about like deliverability, AI, compliance, the DKIM monitoring. All of this I think is tools that are like in these like nice to have buckets, but also important to have. But at the same time, a lot of this stuff is free out there in the market, like MX Toolbox and all these places that you can go out, or you can go buy different tools like spam testing, delivery tools, and different things. I have my own versions of if I love them or not. However, all of these are really important, right? You really want a lot of these things. You want compliance stuff where you're, managing this preference center tools, multi-region tools. Like there's so much you can get into, and the world is crazy with this stuff. I mean, I think that a lot of people only know their like ESP, their pop-up tool, and some of the basics, but you can get into this whole world of QA, deliverability, and compliance tools that are coming into place. What else? Last thing, I think there's probably one or two things that we're missing here. Anything else to add to that, Chase?
I'd say the last one that I can think of would just be like maybe integration platform. So, iPaaS solutions for complex tech stacks, really being able to leverage kind of custom integration development options, allowing tools that, you know, do like real time kind of data synchronization, and then other tools too, like as you want to get nerdy around API kind of management platform. So that was a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot. All right. So, the one thing I want to kind of end this thing on this one thing. And I know we've got a long pod here, but I hope you guys are still sticking with us because we just got really into this stuff. But the one thing that separates that high performing team to a struggling one is really the workflow and process. I know you know this very much, right? So let's talk about it. This just high level. Let's talk about the campaign planning and execution workflow first.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. This is hugely important. So, without these good processes, things fall through the cracks so easily. Everyone's moving a million miles an hour. Things just get forgotten, right? Emails go out with errors and deadlines get missed. Strategy becomes inconsistent. You become reactive versus proactive, right? So, and typically like the workflow at a high level, right? We don't have time to go through it granularly, but number one, you have to do campaign planning and calendar management in advance, weeks, months in advance. So that way, everyone on the team has alignment in terms of what's happening and when. Number two, right, is like then how do you actually build out that workflow for campaign creation? So everything from concept to deployment. What does that look like? The same type of thing on the automation of the flow side. So kind of having automated flow creation and optimization process. QA and testing procedures, right? So it's one thing to write the copy and design and implement them, but it's another thing to actually ship them off. You want to make sure that they look good, they render well, and they're going to work. The links are working, etc. List management, right? Again, like don't want to just batch and blast the same list. You want to clean your list. You want to make sure you're hitting the right segments. You want to make sure that people aren't going without receiving emails that are supposed to receive emails. As you're doing all of this, right, you have to monitor, review, and optimize the performance based on what's currently working and what's not working. And with that, that leads you to A/B testing. How are you going to prioritize A/B tests? What are you going to A/B test? When are you going to A/B test it? And recording the results of the A/B test. And then making sure, right, with all these types of things we talked about, there has to be approvals and there has to be people that have feedback on each different type of thing. And those need to be worked in. Hence why you need to do this in advance, because if you wait till the last minute, things are not going to go out on time. And then lastly, like documentation standards, SOPs, and ways in which your team can kind of collaborate, everything with products, sales, etc.
No, I love that. And I think one thing you got to think about for that workflow, and this is kind of like my management side coming out, but you got to make sure like outlining those key processes, you got to make sure you're discussing those common bottlenecks. You got to share examples of this documentation of how things work, how you track metrics, workflows around like how the team changes, and opportunities that you can kind of see in automations. Like these are all things you got to think about in each part of that workflow step that come into place. It's not as simple as what Chase kind of listed in. You've really got like 4, 5, 6 things inside of each one. All right. Let's shift gears and just really quickly tap about email marketing agencies. Many brands choose to work with specialized agencies rather than building their own in-house teams. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, look, I'm biased. I've had an email agency for, I don't know, like 8 years now, specifically for ecom, been doing it for a long time. So, look, agencies have their own team structures that brands should understand when choosing a partner. Some of the ones have the roles that we've mentioned, and a lot, frankly, don't. So, it's really important to find an agency that has experience working with a brand like yourself. If they've worked with competitors or similar brands, that's a plus. If they've worked with similar size lists, similar products, etc. So, It's super important. I'm biased, so I want to get your opinion. What's your take on when a brand should consider working with an agency?
I think it's pretty clear for me is it's just scenario based. When you need to scale quickly, if you have expertise gaps, or if you just want to leverage like a specialized knowledge without the overhead of a full team, and that's where I'm going to go with all this stuff. All right, let's wrap this thing up. We're at an hour now almost, and I think we went way longer than I expected on this thing. But I mean, we just had so much information to kind of share. But Chase, I want to kind of rapid fire with you because I'll start with the simple question of this rapid fire. What are the signs it's time to expand your team? Give me like 4 of them.
Yeah, I'd say number one would be if you're missing deadlines or opportunities consistently, like you or your team needs help, right? It's very clear. I'd say like if your kind of campaign quality decreases or if there's a lot more errors happening, again, your team's probably just too busy. They're not checking things. You maybe don't have the right process. If people are starting to get responsibilities outside of their core expertise and what they were hired for, that's another sign. And then lastly, right, if your revenue is growing really quickly, but your headcount isn't, sooner or later, whether you're having the issues I mentioned or not, things are going to hit the fan and things are going to break.
No, let me add 4 more to that because as I'm hearing those, I've got some ideas too. So, make sure you're always auditing your current processes and document them. Like, make sure things are working ultimately, and identify that bottleneck. There's always a bottleneck that's the design's taking too long, the copyright is taking too long. One of the things that I've made this mistake over and over when scaling teams is make sure you have a clear job description for every role. Like, write it down. I know what you're thinking to me, but Jimmy, they need to do this. Yeah, I get it, but like, give them the exact tasks. Humans need to know exactly what it is. And last, really making sure that you're developing that material for those team members. All right. Last question for you, Chase, as we're talking about this. One more rapid fire. What are the common pitfalls to avoid as you're looking for these people? Because I know you've hired a lot of these people in your life. And what are the ones that you've seen brands really fail at?
Yeah, so while hiring is important, you want to be strategic. So hiring too many people too quickly just causes things to break. People throw bodies at problems when maybe it was something else. But it is important to hire, right? That being said, I'd say underinvesting in team management, right? We kind of were just hacking it together. We didn't invest there. We were growing so quickly. We had to then pause and rebuild things, which was not fun. Now we're in a great spot, but we're probably 6 months behind where we could have been because of this. I'd say with that, right, neglecting process documentation, document as you go. It's so much easier to do it as you go versus having to then be like, oh, shoot, I need to go back and do things I'm not even doing anymore and document it because I have a new role. And then the last thing is choosing the wrong tools. Choosing tools that don't scale with your growth is a huge mistake.
Dude, I love it, man. I know we went really long here, but so much good information here today, and I hope the listeners here enjoyed our conversation because we really did break down everything from roles, teams, and workflows to building a high world-class email team ultimately, or retention team ultimately. So with that, that's episode 33. If you've enjoyed our podcast, let's make sure you like, subscribe, follow, and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast listening platform. If you're watching us on YouTube and you made it this far on the pod, we'd love if you can comment below and just say, that was great or that was terrible, or give us some kind of feedback. To big thumbs up, make sure you subscribe, all that fun stuff. And you can find our show all over social media. In fact, there's a couple ways to connect with us on the web. First and foremost, if you love what we're talking about and want to continue listening to it, emailmarketer.com. We put it in the show notes. It's a free newsletter. We drop a retention newsletter every day, from breakdowns to tips to strategies. Come check us out. Secondly, if you want to hang out with us directly, we've got a community and a certification program. It's called Ecom Email Certified. Again, check the links in the show notes. But basically, long story short, we've got like 375 people. We're talking on a Slack group. You get a paid newsletter. You can also get into a certification program and digest 25 hours of information from myself and Chase. That's all out there. And of course, you can follow us personally on social media because that's what we do and spend time on. So Chase, where can they find you?
Most platforms, Chase, no A in Diamond.
Yep. And you can find me mostly on LinkedIn and X today. All right. We're back next week with personalization myths debunked. What really moves the needle? That's next week's show. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next week. See you later.
From the open to the click, they're the masters of the flow. Just watch your list grow and your leads turn to go. Did we retain you so far, or do we have to extend it? If you want results, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it. Yeah, You know you gotta send it. Yeah, you know you gotta send it.